Hi, I'm Joseph Scholz. Greetings from Tokyo. Yvonne Vanderpool and I started the Deep Culture Podcast 5 years ago. I can't believe we're already at 50 episodes. Congratulations to the whole podcast team.
Hi, I'm Yvonne Vanderpool and work as intercultural consultant. And I still remember the summer of 2020, in the midst of all the COVID lockdowns, that Joseph, Rob and I started producing the first Deep Culture podcast. We thought we have enough episodes to come for one season at least, and look at it, it's already the fifth season and the 50th podcast. And we worked on that with a large global theme, so it's just wonderful to celebrate the 50th podcast.
Hello everybody, my name is Jonathan Fritz and I'm the sound engineer for the Deep Culture Podcast. And I've been with the podcast since the very beginning, since episode 1.
Hi, I'm Ishita and I am part of the Deep Culture Podcast team since season 2.
Hello, this is Daniel. I was born in Switzerland, in a place which doesn't look like this at all. I was born in a city, in Geneva, but this is the common image of Switzerland. We could be in Austria, in Germany, in France, in Italy, anywhere. I was born in Geneva. My parents spoke Swiss German. I was educated in French, and then I went to Holland, which is all the contrary of this country. It's all flat, as you know. And in Holland, I studied Chinese and Japanese, which then took me to the Far East. I began working as a journalist, as a tourist guide, and later on I joined the International Committee of the Red Cross, which took me to different places: Kuwait, Sri Lanka, China, India, Kashmir, Colombia and Mexico, and Jordan, a little bit of Kenya. Just to tell you that, I'm happy to be with you talking about podcast and the complexity of intercultural affairs.
Hello and greetings from Sevastopol. This is Emre Salat. I'm very excited that we have reached the 50th episode of the Deep Culture Podcast. I joined the team in 2022. This is my third season, and I'm very, very excited to see that we have reached so far.
Hello everybody, my name is William and I'm a Chinese. I have been living in the UK for the past 24 years. And my wife is half English, half German. And through my work, I had the privilege to work with people around the world in nearly 50 countries. So my personal story is a story of cross-cultural exchanges. So congratulations to Deep Culture Podcast on its 50th birthday. Really great achievement.
Hello and welcome to Groningen, the Netherlands. My name is Sanne and I'm a member of the podcast team since the current season, which is season 5.
Hi, I'm Leah. I'm from Norway and I'm the newest member of the Deep Culture Podcast team.
Making the Deep Culture Podcast is an amazing experience because of the Deep Culture Podcast team from different countries around the world, giving you perspectives you just won't get anywhere else. As a listener, I love that it's willing to go deep and not just give you tips and do's and don'ts. We really get into the meat of intercultural experiences.
Why I love the Deep Culture Podcast? Well, many reasons. And as a listener, I always really enjoy the stories of other podcast team members. They often make me laugh, at least smile, and it always resonates because it touches the topics of living abroad, working internationally, and they're just so recognizable. As a co-producer, it was always wonderful to brainstorm in the team and to bring together all the different perspectives. They were like pieces of a puzzle, and during recording it was always wonderful when they all came together. and not only the stories but also connecting that with theory from about culture, but from the brain-mind perspective. So we were always happy and thankful when in the end listeners came back to us and said, wow, that was interesting.
So the reason why I like this podcast is that as a educator and researcher in the field of intercultural communication and education, is that this podcast gives a really valuable insight into more of the holistic view of human experience in this area. And yeah, professionally and personally, it's great to kind of engage in this content on a monthly basis. And the content is produced by like-minded educators and researchers all around the world. And it's just great to get their views on these topics.
I really like the Deep Culture podcast because we really try to dig into the most difficult parts of cultural difference. We don't shoot for feel-good things like we are all human, but we really try to do a more challenging job, but which makes it all the more fun.
In my opinion, the most valuable aspect of these podcasts is to hear individual stories, real life stories, not some kind of theory, not some kind of generalization about different types of culture, which is always impossible. You cannot establish clear categories of cultures. Of course, there are these models, the individualists, the collectivists, the more feminine, the more masculine societies, all these attempts to put labels on culture which ultimately always fail because the differences inside one category are much bigger than with the other category. So the nice thing about podcast is that we could debate with people from other corners of the world about these individual stories which give flesh to a topic which would be maybe a bit dry if taken only from the theoretical point of view.
Reason why I like Deep Culture podcast, both as a listener and a producer, is that although it's a niche podcast, we do have a great impact on the community that we refer to. In the gatherings, we come across with a lot of people who come and say that they listen to our stories and they like them. So that's a great feeling. As a listener, especially, I like the fact that Deep Culture podcast does not provide you do's and don'ts, or as we say, the recipes, but the real stories of the real people that are in the kitchen of intercultural world. We do not give only recipes, but we also show how we make the most of our ingredients in our real kitchens. So I can say that Deep Culture podcast has been a great part of my intercultural life.
This is one of the very few podcasts I came across that talks about cultural deep meanings behind the simply do's and don'ts, like many other podcasts does. And I really appreciate the fact that the team takes you through the journey of what it means to be culturally aware, using real life stories to take you through, to put into context some of the concepts and ideas around the culture so that you can understand how it applied in real life in everybody's story.
As a listener and also as a member of the podcast team, I love this podcast because it is for everyone. Not only for those who have studied the field of intercultural communication in depth, but for everyone. Anyone who engages in new experiences, including people, can benefit from listening to this podcast. And it's because it's packed with examples of people's experiences that you may recognize or not. And in the first case, if you recognize them, it may be comforting. And if you don't recognize it, it's a great learning opportunity because you are informed about a new perspective. Next to these experiences, the podcast also digs deeper to understand the underlying or related processes. So, for example, if we talk about stereotypes, then this podcast will inform you why this is actually a natural part of who we are and also how it works.
I've been following the podcast ever since its beginning, and the reason that I love the Deep Culture podcast is because it's true to its name. It dives deeply into issues of cultural differences and intercultural communication without relying on a specific framework or a specific theory, but it rather looks into research and combines research with personal stories. This makes the knowledge applicable to real life.
One of my favorite episodes is episode 26, The Trouble with Cultural Difference. And I like it because it doesn't talk about superficial things like how to use chopsticks. It talks about the psychological impact of experiencing cultural difference. It has a deep impact on us. It's complex, it's embodied, it's hard to measure. Check it out.
And what is my favorite Deep Culture podcast episode? Well, actually, I have many. And the first one is Culture in the Cradle. And it all starts there very early in life. Cultural differences in parenting practices. And there's another one, and it's about culture and the self. Who are we as human beings? Independent or interdependent? And that view on self also affects cognition, emotion, and motivation. And all those three topics, there are also episodes. So check out, why do we think differently? Why do we think differently? It's an amazing episode. But also the one on emotions. They're also cultural. And our motivation. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. These are my favorites.
So regarding the, my favorite episode, I have my computer here, and I'm just checking all of the episodes that have been produced, all 49. And there's so many interesting episodes. For example, going back to season 1, episode 9, Bias is Not Bias. And also episode 2, season 2, episode 18, Culture Shock. These episodes, I think, are great as an educator in trying to engage with learners in a content which is not written or visual, hence a podcast, getting learners to listen. And I think season 4 has been especially interesting for me personally because it's become more theoretical, and for me, as someone who reads a lot, I find it just to be valuable to be able to engage in this kind of discourse by listening rather than reading. So it allows me to reflect in different ways. So so here's to another 50 episodes, and thank you for listening, everybody.
My favorite episode of the podcast is episode 38, The Road Less Traveled, where we talk about transformative experiences in intercultural situations. The reason it's my favorite is one episode where all the members of the podcast team got together, we shared our stories, our experiences that led us to real life-changing experiences. And I think it brings together all that the Deep Culture podcast stands for. And I think you should give it a listen.
Episode 36, where we talked about Edward Hall, and 40, where we remembered Franz Boas, are probably some of my favorite episodes. I also remember 27. Bad news if you thought you were a global citizen, because I think we demonstrated that this does not exist. There's nothing like a global citizen. And another favorite is the next one. Looking forward to the next episode.
I have many favorites, but if I need to pick up one, I would choose Tagore Empathy, The Other, the 37th episode, and it was in the 4th season. And I especially like the stories that was told by Ishita's father about being the other and how to handle this difference was a really touching experience, and I really like the feeling in these stories. That's why I would choose Tagore and Fethi the Other as my favorite.
If you ask me one of the favorite episodes, I have to say, yeah, it probably is an episode called proxemics. So this is a very not everyday word you use. It basically talks about how different cultures handle personal space. It's fascinating. I'd really encourage you to listen to that. It really is interesting as well to see and to hear, that how different cultures view personal space very differently, and sometimes can make you laugh and sometimes can cause frustration. All depends on what the context is. So thank you very much again for the podcast team for a wonderful job putting all those episodes together, and happy birthday, Deep Culture Podcast.
So now it's my honor to share with you my favorite episode. And even though I like many, if I have to choose one, I would go for episode 49, being Cultural Misunderstandings. This episode provides many different examples of cultural misunderstandings, and it highlights how two people can have two completely different experiences of the very same situation. And not only that, it also shares why this happens and how both experiences can make perfect sense from that particular perspective. It's also a great episode that demonstrates the mission of the podcast, being in my eyes to take away judgment, to say that this perspective is right and the other one is wrong. It is honest in saying that these are challenging experiences. It's not all nice. And also it's acknowledging that even though it's difficult to deal with these misunderstandings, they offer actually a great opportunity to learn. And, in the end, you may find that these difficult situations have become funny stories that you share with others.
I'm the kind of person who doesn't really have favorites. Like, my favorite color or my favorite dish would depend on the day. So my favorite episode probably also depend on the day. But lately I've been re-listening to episode number 22 about culture and the self, and episode number 24 called Are You Weird? And the insight I get from the combination of these two episodes is incredible, because it becomes so evident that cultural differences are real and deep, and that it's relevant for us to know about these differences.